Okay, thank you. This is a panel on banking options for digital sectors, but we do have a Slido question where you can put any questions through slido.com and the banking options. I'd like to let the panel introduce themselves quickly as we start.
Lee Hills, Solutions Hub.
Hello, Tim Cretney from Nedbank Private Wealth.
Nigel Cheesley from Lloyds Bank Corporate Markets.
Nicole Hewson from Wilton Group.
So I'd like to start with the first question on the current view on banking for e-gaming and the digital sector, where we are now and the issues you face in the current climate. I'd like to start with Tim. To say, what are the challenges you face at the moment as banking in the current climate?
Okay, I think first and foremost, the risk appetite for the islands, the risk appetite for the banking industry is probably at odds with a lot of the new ground that is being covered. However, with pragmatism and with a sensible approach to a case-by-case basis, there are options available.
Okay. And Nigel, as a new entrant into banking?
Thanks, Tony. Yeah, so we're relatively new in terms of looking at the market, but we do recognise that e-gaming is incredibly important to the island's economy, and that very much links in with our own purpose, which is to help the island prosper. Having said that, we are fundamentally a low-risk bank, and it's baby steps for us. So we've worked very closely with Steve Brennan and the team at the GSC to really understand the sector more, and I think this educational piece has been really important. So for us, we're very interested in, and we think there are opportunities in the sector, but we are interested in the relationship that operators have with the regulator. We're very keen on understanding what the AML and CFT controls are like, and we've seen that some of the larger operators have very good controls and actually systems that are I guess look as though they're on a par, if not potentially better than some of us banks. So that's a positive. I think the other thing then that's really important to us is the social responsibility angle. So we're looking for evidence of responsible gaming policies that are not just written down, but are actually lived and breathed.
Okay. So Lee, from a company that's bringing applications and licenses in, what are the challenges you're facing now in getting bank accounts for your companies? And is it more difficult than it was in the past?
It's a more long-winded process. I wouldn't say it's more difficult. In the current global climate, it's hard to get a bank account anywhere, pretty much for anything. I've got some friends in the crowd who have opened up small marketing firms, things doing copyright and stuff like that. They're waiting 3 months just for a local bank account. So banking is hard regardless of what you do. If you elevate that and start looking at gaming, yes, you start to get a lot of restrictions and there's less places you can go, but if you approach it the right way, if you don't, sort of go in with an expectation of, here's my business, you should want it, if you demonstrate that the operator's good, that it will be around for a long time, that the controls, the policies, the procedures, again, aren't just on paper for the GSC, they're actually followed, etc., you can build the right case. If you push that a little further, the difficulty comes in that we're seeing more and more wanting to not just use payment providers who might use cryptocurrencies, but accept cryptocurrencies themselves. They might have their own native token, and then outside of gaming, just looking at crypto or blockchain businesses. That's when it becomes tricky. That's when it becomes very hard. It is not impossible for certain. It just takes a long time, and there is a very limited amount of options available. In the meantime, you need to look at alternative solutions and not necessarily say, okay, an Isle of Man bank is my only option here. I might want to have some interim solutions as I work on that and I progress.
All right. And Nicole, are you seeing the companies that you're bringing to get the bank accounts? I mean, obviously, we've seen an upsurge in companies applying from different jurisdictions that want to get an Isle of Man license for an Isle of Man banking for different reasons. So
What we're seeing more so now is I think it's more important now than ever to know your client, and I'm not talking about your passport and proof of address. It's about sitting down with your client, deep dive with them to understand who they are, where they're from, and what their business is. Because any bank is going to do the same thing. The Gaming Commission is going to do the same thing. So we feel it's our responsibility to make sure we bring that client through that with people that want them to do well and support them. And you have to do a lot more digging on your client before you bring them to either the Gaming Commission or the bank. So it's changed over the last few years in that respect, certainly. The bank's requirements are more, they dig down more into source of wealth, source of funds. It's challenging, but it's not impossible. But you have to be, CSPs have to be solution focused and think outside the box and not necessarily go, okay, think about considering bonds and other options and banks outside of the Isle of Man if we have to. But you have to be solution driven for your client.
Okay.
Sorry, can I just add something to that? I think where we've had a decade of zero or negative interest rates, we've seen the requirements for compliance growing every year. Cases that are put to us have to be well presented, they have to be commercially, economically viable, and they have to be sustainable. In a lot of instances, cases are being presented that I pass across my desk on a daily, weekly basis that you just don't feel inspired to actually pursue any further. I think the cases have to be well made and they have to be very well presented, and as I say, they have to be commercially attractive to both sides of the relationship.
Yeah, because that is one thing we've discussed in the past where there's been comments on the fees that are being leveraged. But I think the fees are the last part of the process. The first part has to be the compliance and the gravitas of the business case and who the company is.
Yeah, I think fees are part and parcel of the world today. The traditional banking model of accounts being run almost free if in credit on interest margin are long, long gone. For anything in this sector, everything is going to be categorized at the higher end of the risk scale, which by its definition from a regulatory perspective requires higher levels of oversight. And of course that comes at a cost. So we have to get the balance right. The proposition has to be worth pursuing and worth looking at. Fees do come in because there is no other starting point from a revenue generation perspective.
So, and Leo, I just want to ask you, so are you seeing a lot of, we know there's a lot of jurisdictions that are having trouble at the moment. Are you seeing a lot of companies from those jurisdictions coming to Isle of Man just to either legitimise themselves or get an alternative licence to reduce their fees, or just with a lot of excess baggage that they're coming through? Or?
In the kind of blockchain space, they come for the ability to actually do what they want to do. We've got the Designated Business Act. It works very well for quite a lot of different business models. It's a nice kind of halfway house in between full regulation, which doesn't necessarily work because the business models change so quickly, versus nothing at all and exposing the Isle of Man to a lot of risk, and also having people trying to execute offerings and other things without any type of legitimate oversight on it at all. In the gaming space, of course, there's loads of movement, and I suspect everybody in the room, or most people in the room, will know that there's lots of movement from Malta, from Curacao, other places, and all of the reasons kind of behind that. Why do they pick the Isle of Man? I'd say banking is a part of that, because despite what we may think when we're kind of having coffees in between ourselves on the island, and we think, oh, banking's a nightmare, Tim's not looking at this quickly enough for me, whatever it might be. But the reality is we've actually got quite a lot of available options, especially compared to other jurisdictions. Some of our banks bank the more quality operators from other jurisdictions. We do actually have a lot of available options, certainly in the gaming space. And, again, to echo some of the sentiment that's been said, it's about the quality of operator, the quality of approach. If it's, for example, a Curacao operator, are they moving to the Isle of Man because they're scared of what's happening in Curacao and they don't know what the end goal there is? but actually they've been targeting the US with a sports book for the last decade, and that's where all their money's been rolled up from. And now they want to legitimise it by putting it in a nice clean Isle of Man bank under a nice clean Isle of Man licence. So you've got to watch out for the type of operator and their rationale for coming. But in my opinion, which is probably different to almost everybody's, we're actually in a really good space with banking on the Isle of Man. I think we've got a lot of options available, and we've got a lot of solutions as to how we, when we do have usually less availability, more a timing issue, speed of getting access to accounting services, we've got plenty of other options available to us as well that aren't necessarily Isle of Man centric.
Okay, and well, one of the common questions I've been hearing is about it's a very slow process to get an Isle of Man bank account. Taken a long time and it's very resource intensive. Is there a reason that this seems to be taking 3 to 6 months to get accounts now?
Yeah, sure. I'll say that one, Tony. So I think, as Tim alluded to, really, there is quite a lot of due diligence and work that goes on behind the scenes when we consider any kind of bank account, really. And certainly within the e-gaming sector, we go to a lot more depth when we consider an application. So, you would expect it to take longer than opening a normal bank account for a simpler business.
Yeah, I think also it depends on the complexity of the ownership as well as the complexity of the structure itself. It's not unusual for us to be presented with cases where there will be half a dozen shareholders each having their ownership represented through a trust, owning a company, owning a holding company. Then you have the gaming structure itself. There's an incredible amount of additional due diligence. And as I say, for anything that would be classified at the higher end of the risk scale, there's a much higher level of sign-off and approval anyway. So it's about presenting a sensible structure and presenting it in a carefully prepared form so that it can be easily understood and easily digested. The harder it is to take on, the easier it is to not take it on.
Okay. And I think it'd be a good time to mention the elephant in the room, like blockchain and crypto, and what the appetite is for banking, blockchain, and crypto, and the fact that they're two distinct things. So, cheers.
Sure, I'll kick off then. So I think with cryptocurrency and with blockchain, really, they're both very interesting new technologies, and anything that removes friction from the financial system and makes it more efficient, is going to have traction as time goes on. Unfortunately, particularly with crypto, as we've seen with Bitcoin, there are issues around financial crime. Bitcoin was used, very much with the Silk Road website for illicit goods, and also, we've seen it used as a payment method for ransomware more recently, which is, causing financial crime concerns. And from our perspective within the banking sector, and the financial regulator, a key element of our regulation revolves around financial crime, so it makes it very difficult for us. I think then, if you look at non-backed cryptocurrencies as well, because they are more volatile than other asset types, it does tend to make them less useful as a method of payment for mainstream payment methods. So, there are some challenges there as well. And then, of course, you've got the emergence of backed cryptocurrencies, stable coins, that kind of thing, where the regulation hasn't really caught up with payment regulation, and having for the wider world outside of cryptocurrency, where people rely on payment systems with confidence. That regulation is really, really important, and it needs to catch up, I think, before it becomes more mainstream. And that makes it very difficult for us as banks, really, to, at this stage, support it.
And just to you, Tim, because I think there is a distinction between blockchain and crypto. And for you?
Yeah, we've worked with a number of companies over the last decade working around blockchain technology, blockchain development. Once you get into the real sort of middle ground of mining, of exchanges, then we just can't engage because of the regulatory disconnect there is at the moment. But blockchain as software, that is something that we have worked with. In fact, just anecdotally, one of the companies we dealt with, probably the only one that actually made money by selling a domain name with blockchain in it, and that was the most success we've actually seen with the development of that end.
And Nicole, are you seeing any blockchain crypto companies coming through on your side?
Not for us. It's not an area we've seen crypto potentials, but not so much. I think when you're looking at banking, that it's a challenge again on top of what gaming is, and I think and Lee will probably tell me differently, I think in real terms you're probably looking at banking off island, for banking in that area.
Lee, I know you have a lot of experience with blockchain and crypto.
Yeah, without giving away too much of the secret sauce, there are crypto, specifically crypto, not just blockchain, but crypto companies that have bank accounts on the island. Time, discussion, a lot of courting, a lot of disclosure of source of wealth, source of funds, how you verify crypto transactions. To be honest, probably not worth it. You're probably best off banking it elsewhere because there's lots of other options available across Europe and especially in the UK. But if you do want an Isle of Man bank account, then there are one, possibly two options, and it depends on the business model, but there's probably just easier options elsewhere.
Yeah, because we have just gone through as a government to change the regulations so that from an immigration point of view you can come back to the island, and as a company you don't necessarily have to have an Isle of Man bank account. You can use another Basel II compliant bank in another jurisdiction, which has been a very positive move. I've a couple of Slido questions. One I think straight for you, Nigel. It says, are Lloyds now a banking option for digital e-gaming?
So, as I said before, really, we're taking baby steps into the market, but ultimately, we would be looking to work with those operators that would be best in class, I guess. So our appetite is very much on a selective basis. So all those things that I talked about earlier in terms of really good AML, CFT controls, systems that support robust transaction monitoring, really good responsible gaming policies that are actually lived and breathed rather than those that are just written down and paid lip service to. I think as well, geographically, we would want to see, rather than just a concentration perhaps in Asia, some presence in the UK or Europe, and certainly a significant presence in the Isle of Man in terms of local employment.
Okay. And another Slido question. It says, surely the traceability of blockchain transactions makes them less of a risk for a banking organisation. So from your point of view, Tim, this immutable transaction.
There are arguments that that's true, but equally, I don't think the banks generally are geared up with the technology or the experience to be able to go down that route of evaluating. I think that will probably come in the future. I think the key issue with traceability, particularly with, for example, Bitcoin, is there's no regulated gatekeeper as there is with money moving around the banking system. So whilst you can trace within reason in terms of location and so forth, the perfect traceability isn't there in a system-wide, easily managed form yet for banks to be able to engage.
Okay. And we've got one open question that we want to talk to the panel about, is what can government or digital do to help support the banking industry on moving forward with these things?
So I think education is a key point. You know, there is you know, a lot to be done you know, to make people more aware of the sector, I think. The other key point is regulation. So you know, I think there is consultation papers doing the rounds internationally around how stable coins, for example, can be regulated. And I think, you know, potentially the Isle of Man, you know, could be at the forefront of that kind of regulation, potentially, if it wanted to be.
And Nicole, from the industry point of view, what can industry do to help push this forward and support the combination between the two, between banking and the government, and what the requirements are to get your businesses through?
We spend a lot of time with banks and with multiple banks. I think maybe there is a disconnect between different sectors that maybe we could do a lot better. I know each bank has its own sort of local ACSP and that type of thing, but perhaps the banks and the CSPs could sit down and do more together to bring something that might be practical. A lot of it is to do with education, but an awful lot of this, and more so on the blockchain and crypto, but certainly on e-gaming, is to do with technology. And all of this will require banks to make significant investments in technology, huge, to take on blockchain and crypto. I don't know what the solution to that one is, but the more the parts of the sector work together, the better. No question. Yeah.
So I think from the government perspective, from where we sit, I think it's the direction that the DFE is pointing. I mean, Lee touched on something before about Curaçao as an example. Certainly, if we're presented with a case that involves sort of brand rehabilitation or jurisdiction rehabilitation, that's already got points deducted in terms of getting it across the line for us. Someone coming to us from a better jurisdiction or a better regulated market has got a much better chance of being able to interact with the banking options that are available here on the island, I would say.
And another Slido question, I'm not sure how it was. What key element of e-gaming, a well-regulated sector holding a license issued by a government department and under constant supervision, makes you consider it high risk?
That's one for me again, is it?
Yeah, you're getting all the questions.
Okay, well, we would look at this as being a trading entity, which will push it up the risk scale. We will look at it as being in an industry that would be at the higher end of the risk scale. We would look at it as being essentially third-party due diligence on the people whose money would be passing through. All of these things would push it up the scale. We would then look at it as being the markets that are engaged in. B2B, B2C have a different set of risks. B2C can be cleaner depending on the markets and the means of the flow of funds. B2B can be a bit more opaque. If we would always have to look through, and again, that's just additional risk. So if a client is licensing their product to another gaming company elsewhere, what are they doing with it? How are they regulated? These are all elements that push it up the risk scale from our perspective, away from a very vanilla, simple case.
I don't know if there's any questions from the audience. We've got a couple of minutes. Abby's running around with the microphone. And I can't see anything.
Any questions in the room?
No?
No?
No.
Last chance. Oh, a nice early finish for you.
Yeah, well, we've still got 2 or 3 minutes left. So I might just ask one more question of the panel. So we've had, you were saying, touching before on corporate responsibility, ESG, responsible gambling, and that being a part of the setup that you would take into account on assessing a company. So we know a lot of the companies on Ireland are having a huge push on that. So that's part of a big business case for you now. I'm sorry, Nigel.
Yeah, I think the responsible gaming piece is really critical for us because obviously, and to add to the earlier question, the potential impact of socially of problem gaming is huge, and we see that as a bank from the other side in terms of people that have been affected by that, and having the right kind of policies and systems to prevent that is really, really, really important to us. So we'll look at that really closely because reputational risk, reputational potential damage is something that, as a larger bank, can impact us significantly. And we know that that's the same for some of the larger operators as well. They take their reputation very seriously. So we would look very, very closely at the responsible gaming elements.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's very, very valid. I think from our perspective, turning the clock back 10 years, we worked with a lot of smaller companies. I think as time has moved on, going back to the points I made earlier about commerciality, we tend to now deal with a small number of much larger companies, and we're dealing in jurisdictions where the regulatory requirements are a lot higher. So we are mindful of the requirements here, and we are very mindful that at the higher up the food chain you go in terms of the operators, probably the better the controls are in place. We're also mindful that in elements of the industry, there's probably a little bit of whitewashing goes on, but as I say, it's about getting to know and understand the operators properly and the practices they have in place.
Thank you. And as Tim's been doing a lot of talking all through the session, I'll let Lee close with, what do you think is the biggest challenges for banking coming?
I don't know, you'd have to ask these guys again. I think it's just a challenge for the operators, whether it be gaming operators, whether it be new crypto companies or whatever. Banking was a challenge 10 years ago, it's a challenge today, it's going to be a challenge in 10 years' time. Or maybe not if the crypto sector really takes off, but we'll see. But it's going to be, it's a challenge, it's a problem, but it's something that you have to deal with. And if you're motivated enough, there are solutions out there. You've just got to work with companies, go in with without a level of expectation. Make sure you do. I mean, you've heard essentially what they want to hear. So go and make sure that you're actually in that bracket. For professional providers, knowing your client, knowing if they're moving from one jurisdiction because they are now trying to clean up their act, it's not going to play well locally. So, knowing the clients a bit more, taking a view on those, not taking on every client that might come across the desk, etc. And then building a, if I was in a professional services firm, a CSP at this point in time, I'd probably be looking to hire a treasury manager because that's something that's required across all of my clients. So again, maybe looking out internally and saying, do we have the resources to be able to actually support our clients to bridge that gap between what they want to do and the banks?
Thank you. I mean, just to summarise at the end, banking is available on the Isle of Man, and if you need to be bringing the right cases and the right business to the banks. So.